But we live on Facebook now, so we're gonna wait until about 3 minutes. When the show starts, hopefully people will come on in and we'll be able to share the story.
So is it actually live on my page as well?
Yeah, I'm about to tag you in a post now.
Okay. Yeah, I tried to do this once before, man, and I didn't have any success on it. It didn't work because I was on the D Hall show, and they asked me to do it live, and we wound up having to do it on Facebook. So I already went through this once before. I think that's why it was so easy for me to get on it so quick like that, because it was already set up. It was just like it was already had an existing account.
Yeah. So only thing you really had to do was just hit that link. So we live on Facebook now. We got about 2 minutes before the start of the show, and I'm gonna go ahead and tag you in both.
When the show starts, like it was already had it.
Okay. Welcome to our Facebook viewers. The show will start in a couple of minutes. Just bear with us. Okay, so it's live on your page. I'm about to switch the mics to the radio station, so you won't be able to hear me till the show starts in about 1 minute.
Okay.
Oh.
Nah, I did that. Can you hear me now?
WBISLP 1069, Winterville, Ayden, Grifton, Southside, Greenville, North Carolina.
I try to be a better man, but folks just don't understand. Try to do all I can to deal with this addiction in me. Lord, I don't want to change. I can't stay the same. But the sins that in my vein, it's trying its best just to kill me.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the UTurn Show here at Awesome Radio, WBIS 106.9 FM here in Greenville. We'll definitely welcome everyone to once again the UTurn Show. Make sure you go to our website, WBIS awesomeradio.org, to download our apps on either the Google Play, Apple Store, or Alexa. And also remember, this is a live call-in show. You can call in and comment on the show. Area code 252-756-2008. We definitely want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and I hope your holidays are blessed, peaceful, and joyful as we celebrate the birth of Christ. Tonight, I have a very special guest. A young man who I met out promoting my books, and he told me his testimony, and I told him I would definitely have to have him on the show. So here he is, Mr. Church in the Streets, aka Mr. Tyshun Wilson. How you doing, sir?
Man, I'm blessed, highly favored, man. Just walking in the abundance, the praise, and the peace of God.
Definitely, man. I definitely want to thank you for taking the time out during this holiday season. And we're gonna start right off, man. How did you get the name, or where did the phrase Mr. Church in the Streets come from?
Man, actually, I was in the community doing what I do, man, just doing ministry all over the neighborhoods and in my community, city to city, state to state, man, just preaching and teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. It went from preacher boy to Mr. Church in the streets. And I'm just grateful that God saw enough in me to allow the people to begin to call me Church in the streets. I guess it was to the thing where I was going a lot of places that others aren't choosing to go.
Okay, so basically, he was doing what Christ said: go to the sick. He said those that are sick is the one that need the doctor, not those that are well. So I definitely
Exactly.
hear you.
Bible,
Go ahead.
exactly. The Bible go into the highways and hedges and compel the people to come.
Definitely.
One thing about the people that aren't sick don't need a physician, man. And there's so many sick and there's so many people dealing with different things. Sometimes people refuse to go to the hospital when they're dealing with sickness. So guess what? God created a man that'll bring healing to the sick, man, within the community.
Definitely, man, and of course, the show is the UTurn Show, and once again, it deals with people like myself and yourself who has, you know, was sick at one time. So we're gonna dive right into that, man. About the past, Tyshun, and how did you travel down that wrong path? What were some of the factors, man? If you want to go into like childhood, early childhood, where were you born at?
Well, I was actually born in Jersey City, New Jersey.
Okay,
Actually, I moved to Kinston at a very young age. Grew up in a community where there was a lot of juke joints, a lot of partying and different things of that nature. One thing I can say is I somewhat grew up in a great community, but as well, I grew up, where they sold alcohol and stuff like that. And there was a lot of promising people in my community that liked to drink alcohol. And I had never met my father, so I took on a lot of men from my community and looked at them as father figures, but all of them was drinkers. So I started drinking at the age of 8 years old, sneaking a piece of bottle of liquor from my grandfather's juke joint. I would act like the bottle was gone because I wanted to be like the older men in my community. And I would get the corner of the bottle and tell my grandfather that the liquor was gone. And I would run out there and act like I was throwing it away, and I would take me a squig. And it went from taking a swig at the age of 8 to smoking marijuana at the age of 12 and selling drugs at the age of 12.
okay. So pretty much you grew up in a single parent household, or you grew up with your grandfather, or because you said you never met, and that's another subject I always ask people, but you brought that out that your father wasn't in the house, so you had to gravitate to other influences. So who was, like the stable force in your life as a child, if there was any?
Actually, I will say this, my mother was one of the greatest moms in the world, but my mom was undereducated. I grew up
Okay.
with a mom, like I said, with a third grade education as well. My dad, he was not present in the home. I've never met him, didn't know him. And my great grandfather was my best friend. He was like the promising role model to me. He was the one that taught me, how to be a man, how to structure my life, how to make the right choices and right decisions, how to focus on going down the right path. You know, um, Not only that, he was a father figure or a role model. He taught me how to honor, God's laws, how to walk in God's will, how to understand how to be a man, how to be a productive man in society and make the right choices.
Okay. And we got a similar, story with that, because my father was there in the home. He taught me the same thing, but yet and still I chose to go a different route. And I guess you chose to gravitate towards, like I said, when you're in an environment with liquor house, we call them liquor houses. Y'all call them juke joints, I guess. But when you're in an environment with liquor houses, people drinking, people smoking, people selling drugs, you just kind of adapt to that way of life and see nothing wrong with it. Was that the case? And was that the case in your situation?
Actually, to be totally honest with you, my story about the juke joint was a little different because my grandfather, he sold barbecue, he cut down trees, he was a very productive man. And at the time he was selling this barbecue, he also sold a few drinks here and there. So
Okay.
that's how I came perspective of a juke joint, because he was selling food, liquor, and he was building relationships with people from the community as well as all over the world, because he was selling a lot of what you call pork barbecue.
Okay. So basically, he was an entrepreneur before
Yeah,
the word entrepreneur became famous. So, but
yeah.
nevertheless, like you said, you started drinking and smoking and selling, at the age of 12. What were some of your experiences out there, and where did those experiences lead you in the long run?
Well, honestly, to be honest with you, some of those experiences created a lot of problems for me in life. I wound up in prison at a very young age.
What age
I've
was
been
that?
to
If you don't
prison.
mind me. What age?
What was that now?
What was? I'm sorry to interrupt, but what age was the first age that you went to prison?
The first time I went to prison, I was 19 years old.
Okay, and how long did you do then?
The first time I went to prison, I did like maybe a year.
Okay. Okay. And how did that affect you as a 19-year-old, or did it affect you at all?
It actually affected me because it was to the point where I wound up in the county jail and I was listening to a lot of the older heads, just go ahead, get your time over with. It's a simple charge, it's a small thing. And when I wound up in prison, I found out it was a different story. When you wind up in prison and you get pushed away from your home, you get pushed away from your family. Not only that, you deal with the situation of losing your freedom, not being able to go to the bathroom pretty much when you get ready, not being able to get up and lay down when you get ready, being forced to go out on the yard at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning and have to stay out until 11 o'clock in the afternoon, unless they gave you a job working for the prison system, and you would wind up on the road squad or working in the cafeteria or working for the rec department. Whatever the job might have been, you didn't have the privilege of going to eat breakfast and going to get back in your bed or doing whatever you wanted to do.
Okay. So after that first time in prison, you got out, and then what was your route then? As a young man, just did a year. What was your route? What was your mind state? What did you do?
Well, to be honest with you, when I wound up in prison the first time, I felt like I was a pretty productive guy in the street. So I
Hmm.
kind of was well rounded in the community, had a relationship with a lot of the people. I came home, they put me on papers, they put me on house arrest when I first came home. So I wound up and I paid a man that owned a auto body shop to say I worked for him so I could get around and ease around and sell drugs and continue to live the life, because, like I said, I grew up in a very poor family. So I learned to manipulate the system to get what I wanted.
Hmm.
As I said, I grew up with a mom that had a third grade education, always worked in the tobacco fields, always picked blueberries, always picked sweet potatoes. Like, at that time, if you didn't have the education, jobs weren't really promising if you couldn't fill out the application, if you understand where I'm coming from.
Yes,
Did
sir.
that mean that my a great mother? No. What that meant was she had to work so hard to provide for me and my sister, and other members of my family. You know, um, it made me feel like I had to continue to do what I was doing to stand up to be a man to help provide for my family, which was a manipulation move by the enemy, because once I started drinking and drugging and partying and doing what I wanted to do, it was all about the life of the party. So it was a manipulation tactic that the enemy pulled on me to pull me deeper into the streets, to begin to build a life of crime and to begin to build a life of drinking, drugging, and addiction.
Definitely, man. And I went through the same thing as well, being once again thinking it's all about the money first, and then you get addicted to the lifestyle, you get addicted to the drugs, actually to the drugs that I was selling, which was cocaine. And the next thing you know, you so far deep into an addiction that you're just basically doing things to fulfill your addiction in my circumstances. So I definitely can relate. I just threw that in there just to relate. So you said you been to prison 3 times. So what was the second time, if you don't mind going into that?
My second time around, the second time around was, I think I had got like a probation violation, because let me help you understand. From the age of 16 up until like the age of 30,
Mm.
31, I was always on probation, I was on parole, or either I was in prison, or either I was in the county jail. From the span of 16 years old, so for like the span of anywhere from 16 to 17 years, I was always in the system. Even if I wasn't in prison, I was on some form of probation or parole. So it was like I was indebted to the court system. So sometimes, even though we feel like we're on the streets, we're still imprisoned through the courts. So you have to be mindful of that as well. And that's a tactic that the enemy uses to destroy your life as well.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. So what was the turning point? What was the turning point when you say, okay, this is a cycle, like you said, like you come to realize, okay, I'm being tricked by this enemy, by this system. He's using this system. He's using this quote unquote culture, because we're going to talk about that as well. The culture that is so prevalent in our communities that I think you spoke about it at one of your events, about the culture of being a gangster and selling drugs or gang banging, or being tough guy. At what point did you recognize, okay, I'm being tricked, and what were the steps that you took to change?
I began to truly understand at a young age, because, as I told you before, my grandfather, he was a productive role model in my life. And when I started selling drugs, I became a disgrace to my great grandfather. And as I said, I was his best friend.
Mm-hmm.
But what he didn't never understand was crack was an epidemic. He was selling liquor, and in his time, liquor was an epidemic.
Definitely.
So when I tried to explain to him there was no difference in what he was doing than what I was doing, it
Yeah.
wasn't understandable because of the generations.
Mm-hmm.
So once God began to deal with me about what my grandfather was doing and what I had done, I knew there had to begin to become change, because you have to understand, being I was a disgrace to my family, I was never even privileged to get my license when I turned the age of 16, because my mother never drove.
Mm-hmm.
So that, for that matter, my grandfather was the next of kin that was in position and eligible to actually help me get my license. And because he felt like I disgraced our family, I was never privileged to get licensed up until I was like maybe 40 years old.
Okay. And at that
And
point,
I'm
you got them
47,
yourself.
like, yeah, 5 or 6 years. And you have to understand that was part of my problem in the system, because you're talking about a guy that had um 3 DWIs, 4 high-speed chases, 23 driving while license indefinitely revoked, courtesy to the fact that I wasn't privileged to get my license when I turned 16 years old, like all of my friends. See, all my friends that lived in my community, they came from productive families. Father a fireman, mother work at the shirt factory. They had jobs. They had people that could help them with their homework when they got off of work. When you turn 16 years old, you go get your license and your whole family go out to dinner. So all of this stuff was playing a part in my life as I was growing up. So it affected me. So it made me be to the point where I wanted to live this life and I wanted to get this money because I wanted to live a productive life like I felt like my neighbors and my friends was living. I remember when I started selling drugs at 12. I remember my best friend and I sold the drugs the very first time. We ran from the police. My best friend handed me the drugs after we ran from the police and said, "Hey, I ain't never going back." And you know, he had a family where, hey, dad giving him what he want, mom giving him what he want. I got a mom that's barely in it.
We got a caller real quick. Hold on real quick. We got a caller. Good evening, caller. You are on the air. Thank you for calling. Hello. Okay, we might have lost that caller. I'm sorry about that, but maybe they'll call back. But
Yeah.
So that longing to be or live a life, you know, like you saw others cause you to do that. You said your friend said that he was never going back.
Yeah, so when my friend said he was never going back, I'd never forget that, like, that night. I still reflect on that night, you know, many a days as of now, you know, but I understand that everything that happened to me was part of my story. You know, the Bible says in the book of Psalms 119, verse 71, it was good for me that I had been afflicted, that I might learn your statutes. In
Yeah.
other words, that I might learn God's laws, that I might begin to want to be a productive citizen and live a productive life, you know. So sometimes, you know, God has us to go down certain roads so we can be a help to others. If I didn't grow up drinking at 8 years old, if I didn't start selling drugs at 12, I wouldn't have never became Mr. Church in the Streets. I wouldn't understand how to have compassion for the people that are dealing with and going through some of the things that I went through. You know, you look at the story of Joseph in the Bible, you know, how he was thrown in the pit, sold into slavery. You know, I look at that and I compare it to my life. You know, I look at how I was thrown in the liquor house lifestyle, and now I'm pulling people out of liquor houses, helping them get their life together, showing them how to live productively in society, showing them how to buy houses, showing them how to get licensed driving trucks. You know, not only that, you know, going in neighborhoods, pulling the underprivileged kids out. You know, that's just what I do, man. I'm concerned. Right.
So
you know,
we got about 20 seconds to break. So we're gonna take the station break, and then we're gonna come back and, you know, let the people know how you change, because a lot of people don't know how to change, how to get out of addiction, addictive lifestyle. And we're gonna learn more about Mr. Church in the Streets. Thank you guys for tuning in. Stay with us. We'll be right back. 106.
Is Jesus Christ's life a historical fact?
This is The Legal Alert with attorney David Gibbs Jr. of the Christian Law Association.
Charles Spurgeon, the great preacher in London, England, said, "The greatest and most momentous fact which the history of the world records is the fact of the birth of Jesus Christ." It is a historical fact that Jesus was born. It is historical fact that he was crucified and died. It is historical fact that he rose from the grave 3 days later. No man has ever done that, and no mortal man ever will. Jesus was and is the Son of God. Man's history is separated between the time before Jesus and the time after. Though our society has a variety of traditions around the Christmas season, remember, Jesus is the reason we celebrate. It is our privilege at the Christian Law Association to freely represent those who are challenged for their faith in Jesus Christ.
Get your legal questions answered online at christianlaw.org. You'll find a complete library of information addressing common issues churches and ministries are facing today. Our website again, christianlaw.org.
Following yonder star. This is Ken Ham, enjoying our free Christmas town at the Creation Museum. book of Matthew tells of wise men from the east worshipping the child Jesus. Now, these men were likely important officials from Persia. So how did they know to follow the star to find the king of the Jews? Well, those in the east had many opportunities to learn about the Messiah and even read the scriptures. Think of the Jewish exile to Babylon, Daniel, and the many Jews who lived in Persia for centuries. These Persian wise men may have been familiar with prophecies about Christ, including this one, a star shall come out of Jacob. Ultimately, we aren't told exactly how they knew, but we do know God was behind these officials coming to worship the King of Kings.
Plan your visit to the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter for our free Christmas programs by going to AnswersRadio.com and find more answers at AnswersRadio.com.
This is Awesome Radio.
Lord, I hope this ain't too late for me to die up in these streets. Oh Lord, can you help me?
Welcome back. Once again, 106.9 FM, Awesome Radio. This is the UTurn Show. I am your host, Richard A. Taylor, with special guest Tyshun Wilson, a.k.a. Preacher Boy, a.k.a. Mr. Church in the Streets. And we're talking about his transformation from a life of crime, substance abuse, until ministering to, thousands of people all across the nation and his community. Christy McMillan, just a couple of comments. I gives the 100 symbol. Christy McMillan also says true. Elder Edward Harris says, hey, sir. I thank you guys for tuning in. It's definitely a pleasure. But once again, we're gonna get into the transformation because a lot of people don't know how to get out of that lifestyle. Me myself, I dealt with drug abuse and drug addiction and crime, and it wasn't until I was in jail facing 2 years, and I prayed to God if He would let me get out of this situation without doing those 2 years, then I would get help. So I left the jail cell when the judge declined to give me the 2 years that the state was offering. I went, to a recovery program, and that helped me be sober. Today I'm going on 2 years. So I just say that to kind of just be open with my own transformation, recovery, and change that the God has done in me. So what was your avenue of getting out of years of trouble, like you said, the DWIs, the crime, the lifestyle? How did you do it, or how did God do it in you?
Actually, man, it started out at a very young age as well. I remember playing basketball, in this same neighborhood that I was telling you about earlier. And I remember one Wednesday night, the church light came on and God drew me to the church. And I believe I was about 7 or 8 years old when this actually happened. And I remember that particular night at Bible study was just something about it. And I could remember when God was pulling me to the church. My friends was on the basketball court and they was laughing and they said, yeah, run, church boy, run, church boy. And at this particular time, I wasn't forced to go to the church. I wasn't forced to usher. I wasn't forced to be a member of the church or any of that, because at that time, my mother was still in the world. And I remember going that night and I just learned so much. And I remember this particular pastor, his name was Linwood Chadwick. And I followed him for several years. Even though I was in the street, I was still being monitored by my mother because she was a productive mother. And she watched me and she made me do things as far as the church and different things like that once she began to come in. And this particular pastor, Linwood Chadwick, said, hey, man, it's a calling on your life. God is calling you to preach. And I never forgot that. So when I wound up in prison my second time around, I ran into a friend of mine named Willie Graham, and I had made up my mind and I said, man, it gotta be a better life than this. I remember hanging out with some of my friends several years and we would get high all night and we would party all night and we would make money all day and we would get so high. We would be sitting there looking at each other and saying, hey, man, it gotta be a better life than this. We gotta stop this. We gotta live differently. And when I wound up in prison my second time around, and I ran into my friend Willie Graham. I was at the prison for maybe 2 or 3 days, and they made a church call. And I'll never forget it. My friend Willie Graham said, "Hey man, won't you go to church with me tonight?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll think about it." And he said, "Matter of fact, I got something for you." And he went to his dorm and he came back and he handed me a Bible. And I'll never forget, I started reading that Bible and taking notes. And it was like God began to deal with me with the different stories and the different things I was reading in the Bible. And it was like the Bible began to come alive in before my face. It was like I could relate it. It was like God was putting me in places in the Bible that I could relate to my everyday living. So it was like God began to reveal himself to me. And the more he began to reveal himself to me, there was this choir. And it was a guy from Kinston in this particular choir, and he had been in prison for like 15 years. And it was just the way he would sing and glorify God and magnify God as though he wasn't in the prison. I began to find peace within the brother that was singing, and I began to relate everything that was going on in my life, how God strategically began to place people around me to help promote change within me. And I used those tools as tools to begin to build and restore my life and my relationship with God. Because you have to understand, even though I started drinking at 8, even though I started selling drugs at 12, I still sung in the church choir, in the children's choir. I still ushered on the door on Sundays. You know what I'm saying? And I was still getting high, sneaking in, acting like I ain't done nothing. There was some Sundays I would party so hard. Once I got like 16 and 17 years old, I would literally fall asleep on the doors. And at the church back then, they had swinging doors. And when you doze off, you bump the doors and they come flying open, and all the people in the church start looking at me. And at this time, we had a pastor, and her name was Josie Faye Clark. And my mom would like pop me upside the head and different stuff like that. And Pastor Josie Faye Clark, I'll never forget it. She said, "Just leave him alone. He gonna be all right. God is dealing with him." You know what I'm saying? And it was moments like that that I remembered that helped me pursue God and chase God more and desire the relationship with God. Even though I tell you about the life of drugs and everything, like I had a strong community around me that believed in God, that trust God, because you have to understand, even though people are saved, everybody has issues. Everybody life, everybody going through something. Everybody has an addiction. When you begin to talk about addiction, a lot of people think it's just the drug addicts. A lot of people think it's just the alcoholics. A lot of people think that addiction is a simple thing, when addiction is a wide variety of everything. Addiction can be the bingo hall. Addiction can be the mall. Addiction can be shopping. You know what I'm saying? Addiction can be a relationship. Addiction can be sex. But so many people get caught up in just thinking that addiction has to do with just drugs, and that's not so.
Definitely. Food, pain, people can be
Exactly.
addicted to a lot of stuff. So you're definitely right about that. So man, it's like I said, it's just, I've seen you talk, I've seen you, minister to people. So we're gonna get into that on our next segment. We got about a minute left to go. But doing the next segment, I want to talk about, that mindset to come out and be who you are today, man. Like, businessman, father, husband, a community leader. I've seen, I've been to one of your events, but I've seen a few of events where you bring people together in the community, you put forth effort, you bring people out, you give them resources, you provide the community with hope. And so we definitely want to talk about that. But let me read a couple of comments before we go to break. We got about a minute to go. Christy McMillan asked the question, how hard was it to enter back to society after going through the system? So we're going to talk about that when we come back. My father, thank you, Christy, for your comment. My father, Roger Taylor, says, to God be the glory. The word of God is spirit and life. My mother, Letta Taylor, once again, thank y'all for listening. You were being trained up in the way, and you knew where to return. To God be the glory. And we have Christy McMillan again. Yep, addiction, anything you take too far. And Terrence Vaughn, I don't know if you know him, but he says, my dude from the KTV, we used to play basketball together when we was going up. Terrence Vaughn. So we thank y'all for listening, man. We're going to be right back after this break with minister, preacher boy, church in the streets, Tyshun Wilson. We're going to hear about more about what he's doing and how he once again start doing what he's doing. Stay tuned.
AURN News.
I'm Ebony McMorris. With the approach of the holidays coming, Christmas and New Year's, the president will address the nation about the growing threat of COVID. In the U.S., there have been over 50.8 million cases, and now death totals exceed 805,000. With a rise in the Omicron variant cases, hospitals have been filling as states grapple whether to stay open or shut down. Also, more countries are instituting travel bans. Over the weekend on Meet the Press, Dr. Anthony Fauci admitted that scientists were thrown off by the level of COVID mutations.
It's unprecedented. There are about 50 of them, 30 of them in the spike protein, and about 10 to 12 of them in the receptor binding domain. The extraordinary number of mutations and amino acid substitutions, particularly with Omicron, no one had expected it that much.
For AURN News, I'm Ebony McMorris.
This is Apostle Gary Lee, and you're listening to Awesome Radio on WBISLP 106.9 FM.
Yes, and we are back at Awesome Radio 106.9 FM, Awesome Radio WBISLP. Here once again with the UTurn Show on our last segment with special guest, Mr. Tyshun Wilson. And we're going to go back to a couple of comments here. Terrence Vaughn said, Mills Funeral Home. I guess that's where he remembered you. He definitely said he's proud of you. But back to the question, how hard was it, when God started dealing with you and, you're re-entering into society? How hard was it? As you mentioned, everybody has problems and issues, even when you're doing right. So tell our listener audience, how did you, come out with that, with that overcoming mindset?
Okay. First of all, I just like to say we were talking about the second time that I was in prison, and I was kind of telling about how I got back to God, and I was studying and I was doing things in the will of God. I'm gonna kind of push through a little bit so you can kind of get a backdrop of everything that went on.
Yes,
so
sir.
I was studying the word of God, learning the word of God, focusing on God, trying to build in God, so I would be strong enough to walk away from the streets and not make those choices. So I came home from prison. My mom asked me to make her a promise that I wouldn't sell drugs anymore. I came out. I got into a program called Vocation Rehabilitation. I signed up to get a grant to open my own barbershop. Not only that, Vocation Rehabilitation helped me land a job at a company called Barnett. I think I was working getting paid by the month, and I was only making like $500 or $600 a month. They was paying me the bare minimum. They was giving me just enough to survive. I was only being paying once a month. They was providing me transportation. It wasn't really enough to survive. I had a cousin that was a very productive drug dealer. He offered to do some things for me, and I was telling him, I'm just trying to get my life together. This ain't really what I want to do. I was telling him I was trying to open my own barbershop through Vocation Rehab. So to make a long story short, Vocation Rehab actually accepted my application to help me open my own barbershop. but it took so long for them to respond. I took the offer from my cousin and started, instead of being a panhandler in the streets like I was, I called myself gonna sell a little bit of weight here and there, because that was something that I never done. I always had crack houses. I always had spots where I could sell to individual junkies, so I wouldn't take the risk of getting those big type of charges. So anyway, once I started doing this, I started noticing somebody was following me, but mind you, I'm still sniffing powder, I'm still smoking weed, I'm still partying real hard. So the people that were hanging around me were so focused on getting high and having a good time, they would just tell me I was tripping off the drugs and wasn't nobody following me. But I knew I was being followed. So lo and behold, I kept telling them, nobody would listen. So I went home that day and I told my mom, I was like, Mom, I think I'm in some real serious trouble. Some people following me around. And she was like, well, you ain't got nothing to worry about because you ain't been selling drugs. And I said, well, Mom, I have been selling drugs. I'm just not on the corners like I used to be all day. I'm kind of a behind the scenes guy without really going into detail with her about what I was doing. So anyway, I said, well, I think I'm getting ready to get a whole lot of time because the people that are following me are not regular Kinston police. Lo and behold, it was vocation rehab following me because they was monitoring my lifestyle because they was getting ready to offer program. So mind you, me being, a street guy, never dealing with the feds, thinking it was the federal police, I started getting high. I started dabbling with not powder cocaine and marijuana. Now I've changed up the crack and I'm crushing that up in marijuana because I'm saying, hey, if the police come and get me, I'm going to be a junkie. I'm just getting high. I'm making enough money to support my habit. That was my intention. That was my plan. But I had access to so much drugs instead of getting, $50 high, $100 high, like your average junkie in the community. Nah, I was getting $1,000 high a day because I had access to the drugs. I had the connections. So lo and behold, I wind up and get so bad off, I'm still in the court system, got a violation, go back to court. When I stand before the judge, I'm late. The judge say to me, Mr. Wilson, you ain't got all that money you used to have. What if I give you $100,000 bond now? I said, well, you'll be doing me a favor. He said, nah, we heard you getting high. I'm going to send you back out there and let you kill yourself. I OD'd 3 days later. I overdosed and died and was in a coma for 3 days. God blessed the doctors to bring me back to life. When I woke up, I remember my mom being in the room and said, boy, you need to stop this. And the doctor walked in the room and said, well, Mr. Wilson, you done everything it is to do now. You kill yourself getting high. What is it to do next? I said, I'm giving it all up. I'm giving my life to God. I was in the hospital for like maybe one more day. When I got out that next day, my mother was ushering at a church. They were having a revival at this church called St. James on East Street. And I told my mom, I'm giving it up. I'm going to give my life back to God. And my mom went to this church and she had the usher. I remember having like $40 in my pocket when I walked in the church that night. And when they made the offering, I said, God, I'm giving all this money to you because I don't want to live this life no more. I don't want to be this guy no more. I want to get my life together. And I said, Ma, as a matter of fact, I'm ushering on the door with you. And I stood on the door. God took me back to when I used to usher on the door as a kid. He put me back on the door that very same night after I overdosed. And when I came out of the hospital, the night after that, I ushered at a church. I'll never forget it. And at the end of that service, after I gave my life back to God, I went to the altar, rededicated my life back to God. And at the end of the service, this lady came up to me and she said, God told me to give you this. And she handed me a $20 bill. And when she handed me the $20 bill, I looked at my mother, and I said, Mom, I'm going to the store and get a pack of cigarettes. Cigarettes was $2.25 a pack. I'll never forget it. I went to the store, got that pack of cigarettes. I left my mom at the church and went to the crack house because the devil had done fooled my mind and said, hey, go buy you a half a gram with that $17, which was $50 worth of crack, and go sell it and flip it and make some money. I went over there. I stayed at that crack house from maybe 9 o'clock that night until 1 o'clock that morning, waiting for a sale with that $50 worth of crack. And I got that $50 worth of crack for $17. I held on to that crack and no sales never came. I'll never forget it. And eventually the enemy talked me into hitting that first rock. And I started back getting high. And this girl that I was dating that had came into $50,000, she pulled up with a bag full of dope and said, come on. And I said, yeah, Bonnie and Clyde back together again. And I jumped in the car and we rolled up this hill. And I'll never forget it. And we stopped in this parking lot because she came to the church that night and she got saved with me. But her intentions was to pull me away from God. So once she seen I was serious about what I was doing, she left me at the church. So when she came in there and seen I had done smoked that little bit of $50 worth of crack I had, she said, Tyshun, I thought you wasn't going back. Look at you looking stupid. Come on, I'ma hold you down. And she had a whole bag of rocks. And I got in the car with her. We went up this hill and she handed me a handful of rocks. I took about 3 or 4 rocks and put them on the pipe and melted them down. Soon as I hit that pipe, that girl took that whole bag of rocks and threw it in my lap. I jumped up out in the car and ran down the highway. Heart went into cardiac arrest and I was right back in the hospital. And the whole time, what happened was when my heart went into cardiac arrest, I was less than a half a block from my mama house. So a crackhead and a drug dealer picked me up and carried me to my mama house. And I'm foaming and gasping. And when my mom opened the door, she said, yo, get them off my porch. I can't go through this no more. And the crackhead and the hustler, I'll never forget. They picked me up and started carrying me off the porch. And God was letting me look at all of it. The crackhead and the hustler carried me to some railroad tracks. The crackhead had started repeating the 23rd song. And the drug dealer, now I could hear the train coming down the railroad tracks because they stopped at a railroad track. And this daggone drug dealer started taking a bucket of water and sprinkling it on my head. And while he was sprinkling it on my head, the crackhead was repeating the 23rd songs. And God, when the train was coming, all I could hear was God saying, you got to make up your mind. And I said, God, I'm sorry. If you just let me out of this one, I'll never do it again. And the ambulance finally came and got me. And it was like I was getting ready to die. It was like something was happening to me. And I'll never forget when they got me to the hospital, I said, God, if you just let me out of this one. And it was like the doctor was getting ready to try to have sex with me or rape me. I don't know. It was just like those demonic spirits was on me so bad that, and they was like, his heart going into cardiac arrest and this and that. But the whole time it was like the enemy was trying to make me think they was getting ready to rape me in the hospital and all kind of stuff. And lo and behold, God just let me snap back to normal like nothing ain't happening. And I said, hey, what are y'all doing? I sat right up on the doctor bed, and they was like, hey, do you know who you are? Do you know what's going on? And I said, yeah, my name's Tyshun Wilson. And I started answering all the questions and they started checking my vitals and everything went back to normal. They checked me out for like 2 hours and let me walk right out of the hospital. So when they let me walk right out of the hospital, I was like, man, I gotta get my life together. Like, I really was trying. Now my mom, she really broken. She been saved for like 15, 20 years at this time. She can't figure out why I can't get my life together. I'm stuck out here. A few days go by. Now I'm getting scared. So I wound up in the house at my mom's house for like 3 or 4 days. Wouldn't even come outside because I'm scared I'm going to get high. Don't know what to really do. Trying to get myself together. Trying to make up my mind. I'm praying and I'm relating to God. I'll never forget. I came outside on a Friday. Crack house was right across the street from my house. Money was coming like crazy. And they was like, Ty, you ain't doing nothing. I was like, nah. Eventually, the enemy talked me into, I'm going to make a sale here and there. I ain't going to get high no more. Started making a few sales. When I started making those sales and doing that stuff, now I want to start tricking with the women. Once I started tricking with the women, I wound up back in the hotel with this girl again. I hit that pipe and it was like the enemy looked at me right through the mirror. I threw the pipe out the daggone hotel room and I said, I ain't going through this no more. I started walking to my mom's house. As I walked up on the front porch, something said, if you go in there, you're going to die in there. I turned around and walked away from there and said, let me go to this pool room so if I fall out or something happened to me, somebody could get me some help. When I got to the pool room was closed and nobody was there. So I walked to a crack house. I said, I know somebody going to be at the crack house because everybody trying to get high. I get to the crack house black. Ain't nobody out there nowhere. So the spirit's riding me so bad. I'm walking by the post office and the spirit start riding me so bad. I start hollering out and crying out, somebody help me. They trying to kill me. Nobody heard me. So I said, I'm going to the police station and turn myself in like I'm going crazy and somebody trying to kill me. As I walked to the police station, the courthouse to turn myself in, when I began to walk to the bottom of the steps, it was like it got darker and darker and darker. And I could hear God saying, that ain't where you need to be going. I turned around and got on Queen Street and started walking down the yellow line. And I said, God, if this be you, either take my life tonight or take this from me. I could hear a car riding behind me real slow. I never looked back. And all of a sudden, I said, God, if this really be you, take this from me. And all of a sudden, them spirits just started flying off of me. Shoot, 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 shoot. When them spirits came off of me, I jumped up and started running for joy. I ran all the way to my mama's house. I bust in her room. It was probably like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, Mom, you ain't never got to worry about it again. It's over. I ain't smoked no crack or done no drugs since then.
How long ago was that?
Man, that was 17 years ago, man.
That was 17 years ago.
17 years ago.
Man, and I thank you for sharing that because it testifies on how you can want to do right so bad. But you kept saying the enemy show you this, the enemy tells you stuff, the enemy talks to you, the enemy shows you stuff, hallucinations, whatever. He gets into your mind and tells you, and he sets situations up to make you think you're going to do the right thing. Put you, he puts you around those people. He puts you in those certain situations where he allows those demons to resurface, man. So I thank you for sharing the whole entire story because people don't understand how real those spirits are. And when you said the spirits jumped off for you, I felt that before. So I felt that when I was in the recovery program, but I felt like a freedom, and when I felt it, like you said, I'm never, even though I wasn't around, I said, I'm never getting high again. Like I like this feeling right here, this feeling of freedom. So man, I thank you for that testimony, man, because I don't know if you remember the day I met you, but I met you and I'm like, I would never think none of that because when I saw you had your, I think you was on the work truck, you dressed all nice, you was handling business, had your phone, and I'm about to go do this, that, and the other. And so people need to hear those stories because there's somebody right now thinking that they gonna be in that situation forever, or like you said, hiding in the house, don't know if I'm gonna get high, scared to go outside for fear of getting high, and trying to fight something that you can't fight by yourself, man. So I definitely commend you. And one more comment from our boy Terrence Vaughn. Boy, you got a testimony. God was with you the whole time so that you could help somebody else. People will listen if they have seen you go through it and come out of it. And that's definitely true because, a lot of people don't want to hear you if you can't relate to them. So that's definitely a story that people can relate to. So then what was your next step, after that?
So from there, I left Kinston. I got on the 18-wheeler with my brother. He was saved. He was a preacher. He was my brother-in-law. Him and my sister, they always invested time in my life, trying to help me get myself together and stuff like that. They would pray for me. And then it was at a point in time in their life where they was like, hey, we know we doing the right thing. We just gonna trust God. We gonna leave you alone. So I called him and I was like, yo, I'm ready to get on the truck. I rode that truck with him for about 2 months. Over the highway, over the road, praying, fasting, living, studying, learning about God, trying to get my life together, stop getting high. I was clean. Probation officer called and said, hey, got a violation for you. Need you to go back to court. I'm gonna make sure you don't get locked up. Everything gonna be good, I'm gonna talk to the judge for you. I don't even want you to get locked up. The probation officer even kept her word, went up there and said everything that was right for the judge not to lock me up. The judge said, well, I sentenced you to 2 years in the North Carolina Department of Correction. Mind you, this was the third time around. I looked at the judge. I looked up to heaven. I said, but God, I done everything you asked me to do. I heard God just as clear as they say now. I got something I need you to do for me in the prison system. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, that last time I went to prison, it was like I was never locked up a day. I ministered, preached, taught, studied the Bible 5 and 6 hours a day the whole time I was in prison. If I won't study in the word, I was ministering, or God was allowing me to be a light to the people. And don't get me wrong, it was some of the old friends in prison with me saying, nah, that guy drug dealer. Y'all don't know that dude. He talking that word. He preaching that word. He telling y'all that stuff. But the moment he walk out of here, he gonna be right back to selling drugs. I told them guys, I said, with everything that's in me, when I walk out of here, I'm gonna be a new man. I'm living a new life. Right. I walked out of prison. I kept my word. My very first job I got.
Just 1 second, just 1 second, man. We're gonna close the radio show, but we're gonna keep it live on Facebook. We thank y'all for listening. 106.9 FM. Thank y'all for the UTurn Show. Thank Mr. Tyshun Wilson, and we're gonna be back with you next week. With all of our Facebook listeners, stay with us because we're gonna be live right on Facebook. But thank y'all.
Lord, I need you to smile on me. Lord, I'm pleading. Tell me.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, so when you walked out of prison?
Yeah, so when I walked out of prison, I was blessed with a job at a company called Master Brand. So lo and behold, I went in there. I never missed a day at work. I messed around and hurt my hand. I messed around and got something called the querceus tendonitis in my hand. I was a very productive worker. They made a decision to fire me not knowing I had got a doctor. So when I got this doctor, lawyers started contacting me because they fired me during a layoff. And they didn't supposed to lay me off because I was under doctor's orders or whatever. So lawyers began to contact me. I wound up and got $10,000 for this situation I was going through with my hand. And that was like my door opener. Not only to the first fellowship center I had, which was True Deliverance Fellowship Center, where I had the privilege of opening and having a program for underprivileged kids, for drug addicts and alcoholics. Mind you, I did that particular program and I helped people in the community that were going through different things, mentoring, helping people with people skills, with community skills, with relationship skills. Not only that, helping people find employment and different things like that. So within this fellowship center that I opened, I did gospel singings, praise dancers, mimes. I did a thing called Monday Night Live, where we would have a barbershop conversation about life's issues and compare it to the Bible with guys from the neighborhood that were trying to get their life together. Mind you, all of the things that I've been doing were things that God gave me while I was in prison. The Bible says in the book of Habakkuk, write the vision and make it plain. So I wrote my vision in prison. Everything that people see me doing now is the vision that God gave me when I was in prison. and I just wrote it out, and I kept sticking to the vision. I would go back to it and look at it from time to time. My very first business I opened was a landscaping business called Blessed by the Best Lawn Care. I remember cutting grass for 10 years straight, 6 yards a day. As long as the grass was growing, I was cutting it, and I was working a 10-hour-a-day job. That's how I began to save up the money to open up this fellowship center. I remember the first year starting my grass business, I made $23,000 cutting grass. I was paying child support. Mind you, when Master Brand let me go, I started working at a company called Electrolux. I was a temporary employee for 3 years and 2 months, a temporary employee making $5.75 an hour, paying child support for 2 children, and I made it. That's how I began this landscaping business, because I wasn't making enough money to pay my bills and provide for my family with the child support I was paying. So once I began to make this extra income cutting grass, it afforded me to open this fellowship center and begin to do these things in the community for the underprivileged kids, the drug addicts, and the alcoholics. Like, I had a little drill team called True Deliverance Drill Team, and I created that drill team out of the worst kids from the city of Kinston in the projects. The program was so productive that Judge Beth Heath from the North County court system, the juvenile court system, she called me and had me to write a grant proposal for the program to begin to mentor some of the children from the community that were coming through her court system. I wound up with some of the kids, but I never wound up with the program. So I knew what I was doing was very productive. Out of the 25 little boys I took from the community, 24 of them graduated. 24 of them went to college. 24 of them learned community skills. 24 of them learned how to be productive in society, how to decrease violence. I did so many things with the kids and worked so hard to help them become great because it was necessary. Not only was I helping them, they were helping me become a productive citizen in society, to help me understand who I was. Not only that, to fill the void for the need that I had as a kid, somebody to look up to, somebody that could motivate and encourage me, not only from a family perspective, but an outside community person. But moving right along, from the fellowship center to, becoming who I am now, Mr. Church in the Streets, Mr. Church in the Streets, Preacher Boy Trucking. It went from cutting grass to buying my first house. I got blessed by the best real estate. I own 10 properties now. I remember buying my first piece of property, saving up my grass money. The drug dealers I used to hustle with, I remember days they would laugh at me when I come by cutting grass in my old pickup truck. They would be counting their money, and I remember tears rolling down my face because I knew they couldn't make more money than me. And all I could hear was God saying, keep going. I'm going to show you something in a little while.
Yeah.
Keep going. I'm going to show you something in a little while. And them tears would just be running down my face, and to be honest with you, I'm just so grateful, for where God has brought me from and where God has taken me to. Sometimes even the naysayers don't believe, because God can make your story so unbelievable. People got to think that you still doing some of the things you used to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
and
the
I
Bible
saw.
says,
Go ahead.
Yeah, the Bible says in the book of Matthew 5:16, but let your light so shine before men so that the Father in heaven will be glorified. Sometimes the light will be so bright that people that don't really know who God is won't understand it, but they'll know it's something about you that's different, man. Not only that, like, how did Preacher Boy come about? A lot of people don't even understand. I remember I preached this youth convention at the Free Will Baptist Church over here on Lincoln Street in Kinston, and it was about 600 kids there. And I'll never forget, I was ministering and the kids was going crazy in this particular church. So this lady that worked with me, she's actually the president of the NAACP here in Kinston now. but she wasn't at the time. She was just a member. And I remember I come into work that Monday after I preach, and preacher boy, come here. So when she was saying preacher boy, I was taking it as an insult. You know, for a long time, I never would say nothing to her. I was still respecting her because she was an older lady. And I began to question God about that thing. And God said, take what you feel like somebody is saying to you or doing in a negative way and make it a positive. So that's when I decided to create Preacher Boy. And then when I started my trucking business, I named it Preacher Boy Trucking. But the original name of my business as a whole is Blessed by the Best Associates LLC. After God delivered me from drugs and alcohol, when people would say, how you doing? I said, well, I'm blessed by the best, of course, you know, because he chose to let me live. So that's how Blessed by the Best Associates LLC came about. That's how Preacher Boy came about. And one day I stopped the lady and I asked her, I said, hey, I don't mean no harm, but every time you call me Preacher Boy, I've always taken it as an insult. And the lady said, no, baby, you taking that the wrong way. She said, ever since that day I heard you preach, I used to see how you run around the job and try to act like you ministering to people and saying stuff. And I would listen to how people would talk about you in an indirect way. She said, nah, baby, I was looking at you like a superhero because you put a whole different perspective on my life when you ministered to them young people and they looked up to you and went crazy like that. So I've always looked at you like a superhero in the gospel. So that's why I started calling you Preacher Boy. So when she said that, it really blew my mind and ignited my fire. So now I look at myself like a superhero in the gospel of Jesus Christ, man.
And I look, I can see that because, like I said, I've seen your lives, but I've also seen you in person. You know, at the Church in the Streets event that I attended, you know, a few months back. So I was going to ask you, like, because you're so adamant, you know, you're unashamed, you know, about what God's doing. You're talking to everybody in their face about God and what He has done with no shame. So how, because, you know, sometimes people, you know, oh man, you always talking that God stuff. You always talking, you know, Christians sometimes get a bad rap about being too preachy, but you know, you don't, there's no shame in you. You know, like when I see you on the stage or on the live, it's just like, you know, I've seen it before, but once again, like not from somebody from the quote unquote streets, you know, that's so gung ho about what God is doing, you know, quoting scriptures, praying, you know, giving people encouragement. How, you know, have you ever, you know, said that maybe I should step back, or, you know, maybe I'm too preacher boyish, you know what I'm saying? Have you ever had that mindset?
Man, that's crazy you said that. You know, to be honest with you, man, that just happened to me last week, man. A couple of weeks ago, man. People really discouraged me last week, a couple of weeks ago, man. God allowed me to to do a candlelight visual. And a lot of people came against me and said I said some things I shouldn't have said. And I know it was what God told me to say. And people try to make me feel like I said the wrong thing or I didn't go about it the right way when I know I did what God told me to do. You know, at the end of the day, I got to a place like Jeremiah and I said, hey, ain't gonna tell nobody else about God. When people talk and say they want to talk to me about God, I'm gonna tell them we'll talk when we get to heaven. Live your life, because that's what y'all want to do. You want to be who you are. You want to live like you want to live. You know, hey, you know, we living in a time where wrong is right and right is wrong, and people is accepting it, you know. And at the end of the day, we got to stand up for what we know is right, regardless of what the world thinks. You know, you got to think about it. At the end of the day, man, the Bible says in the book of Galatians 6:7, be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. So you got to understand, man, You got a lot of people out here putting stuff out there that ain't true, that ain't right, but they got to remember, you got children growing up out here. You got a family growing up out here. Do you want your family to be an heir to all this foolishness and all this deceit that you putting out here? So, you know, a lot of stuff is dear to my heart, because when the Bible talk about sowing and reaping, a lot of people don't even know. You might marry a woman, and the very same thing you did to your kids, you would think it might come from your kids, but it come from your wife kids. Or some of the things you've done to your mama and daddy, it might come from a kid down the street. You know what I'm saying? And if the community ain't training children up in the way that they should go, and they allowing them to do whatever they want to do and allowing them to live any kind of way they want to live, you know, hey, people say you shouldn't say that. That's them people kids, or you shouldn't address that. But guess what? I feel like this. Didn't Jesus die for what he believed in? Like, who gonna raise the village if the church don't step up? We got 120 churches or more in the city of Kinston. Guess what? The churches ain't really getting out here and promoting and pushing and trying to correct people when they wrong. Guess what? At the end of the day, if we don't do it, who gonna do it? Look at what the world is coming to. And because I care for the people, I'm gonna do what's right. I'm gonna say what's right. Like at the end of the day, right now, you take, I say 90% of the preachers in the community, all of them preaching for offerings. You understand what I'm saying? If it was heartfelt, if it was in your heart, if it was what you really God called you to do, it wouldn't be about the money. He said, take no thought. I'm going to provide for you. Go where I tell you to go. Do what I told you to do. You ain't even got to worry about it, because your money, your food, your home is going to be provided for. And I know God going to do that, because guess what? Every house I got, God provided it. Every job I had, God provided it. Right now, God bless me. I'm opening up a house right here in Kinston, next door to my house. Church in the Streets at the Sparrow House, a program for underprivileged kids, a program for drug addicts and alcoholics, a program where the community can come and it's free of charge. We ain't charging nobody nothing. We don't even got no grants yet. We don't got no 501c right now. The Church in the Streets event that you came to in the community, people don't show up and give me money like that for that stuff. I pay for that with my hard-earned money. I pay for that. I take money from my family, from my home, out of my house, because I love the community and my people that much. You understand? Like, people say they love you, but what are they doing to prove they love? Love is an action word. You know, if you love me, I'm going to tell you the truth. If I love you, I got to tell you the truth. I can't make it feel good. The Bible says in the book of Corinthians, love is not puffed up. It vaunteth not itself. In other words, love don't just feel good. Sometimes love hurts. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's so much I could tell you, man. Like right now, I created the trucking business to create this money to do church in the streets. To be honest with you, I don't want the trucking business, don't really want the houses or none of that. But if that's what it takes for me to do ministry and be able to help the community, that's why I do it. I've always known how to make money from the very beginning. Making money ain't no problem. The thing is, hearing from God and knowing what to say to the people, that their life might be changed, that their heart might be pricked, that their soul might be saved. That's what really matters to me. That's what makes the difference. That's the passion that you want to know about. The Bible says in Philippians 2:5, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. And when you take on the mind of Christ, you take on the heartache, you take on the pain, you take on the suffering, you take on the attitudes, you take on the neglect, you take on everything that the world got to give you, not realizing who you really are. The more you become like Christ, the more you're going to be beaten, broken, and bruised, but you still got to do God's will. It's just as simple as that. And a lot of people don't understand that. So a lot of times people see me smiling, but I'm crying on the inside, because I want you to get your life together. I want you to know it's a better life. Like right now, a lot of people feel like, you know, they doing drugs. They'll take their last $5 or $10 to buy a bag of weed and know they got a baby need Pampers, and then come to the preacher or the church and act like you done them wrong because you won't buy the Pampers that you know they just took the money and got high with. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's just so many different things I could tell you because I'm out here every day looking. Right now, I've been going to this horseshoe pit. We got this place called the Wood Ducks Park over here in Kinston. I've been going over here for the last 4 or 5 months throwing horseshoes with the winos, the drinkers, and it's a few working class people that come through here. But guess what? You don't never see no preachers. You don't never see no pastors. You don't never see no choir members going over there to hang out with them people and love on them people. Guess what? If you spend a little bit of time with them, if I had some assistance or some help, my voice might not be enough, but if you had 2 or 3 more church folk to show up and encourage the very same group of people, it might be more effective. Don't drag me to the ground because I'm trying to do something you refuse to do. It's a lot of things I could tell you, man. It's a lot of things I could show you. But the thing is, when you do start addressing or talking about the issues that's going on within the community to better the community, to help other people grow, guess what? I said something I wasn't supposed to say. This is what I was telling you about wrong being right and right being wrong, when guess what? Do I love you because I tell you the truth? Come on, man. What is our job?
Every even if you look in the Bible, even the prophets, and even some people, today, like you look at the great leaders who always spoke the truth, they always got a lot of backlash because once again, people will love a lie more than they love the truth. You know what I'm saying? People would rather, do evil than do good. And when you call out that evil, then, they flip it like you're the bad guy. But I want to be the first to say and encourage you, man, that don't stop, because there's many days where I woke up and, or I flipped on Facebook Live and saw you or heard your voice, saw your passion out there on the corner stores and talking to people, just encourage and give it those encouraging words, right, driving your truck, you know what I'm saying, that lifted my spirits, you know what I'm saying, or made me keep going. So you never know, who's gonna miss that voice if you don't speak it, no matter who like it, like I think it was, who was it, Elijah laying by the tree, under the tree, and asked God to kill him because nobody was listening. They had killed all your prophets, you know what I'm saying? And God was like, man, just hold up, man. So just chill out for a minute. Go ahead and take your rest. But then you got to get back out there, because that's why I called you, man. So, many y'all called, but the chosen are few, man. And I definitely feel like you're chosen to do what you're doing, man. Because every since that event that I went to, I'm like, man, this guy's serious. This guy's out here, and I saw the choirs out there. I saw so many different members of the community, and I ain't even from Kinston, but just being around people, I can tell who's who and what's what. And you brought a lot of people together, a lot of resources. It was a lot of people there to come and hear what you was, the word that you said, and everything that you said there. Want nice and gentle, and you called a lot of stuff out there, which once again, it goes on everywhere, and a lot of people are scared to say things because it's not comfortable. It doesn't rub. It's like my man. Somebody was talking about Pastor Joel Osteen. Shout out to he got those feel good. Love being such and such. And that's cool. So that's his style. That's his thing. But he ain't gonna hurt your feelings. You can depend on a feel good message. Like if you want to feel good, you gonna turn on Joel Osteen. You gonna turn on a couple of more pastors. That's just gonna make you feel good. But is it going to address those issues that need to be addressed? Is it going to call out those hypocrisies? You know what I'm saying? Is it going to make those crooked places straight? As the Bible said, man.
Honestly, I want to preach some of those feel good messages, but I want God to And listen, and I've even asked God or questioned God, you know, God, when you gonna let me preach some of these messages?
Yeah.
And the thing, what I'm understanding is, man, people have to be groomed and taught. You know, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14, 15, 16, and 17. It says, but continue thou in the things which thou hast learned of me, and has been assured of knowing of whom thou hast learned them, and that from a child thou hast known the holy scriptures, which are able to make thee wise unto salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. All scripture is given by the inspiration of God, and is profitable for doctrine and correction, reproof, and instructions in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. Understand this. I believe if people are taught right, if people are structured right, if we can just get people to hear. You know, the Bible says in Proverbs 4:1, hear ye children the instructions of a father, and attend to no understanding. If people would just begin to listen, if people would just begin to open up their ears and hear what the Spirit of the Lord is saying to the church. See, people thinking you got to go in the building to be a part of the church, when that's not necessarily true. The church is in the world. The church is wherever you are, because you are the church. No matter who you are. The thing is, are you accepting God as the church? You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, sometimes you got a lot of preachers and a lot of pastors that preach beyond where the people are at. How can I reach if I'm preaching over your head? If you overeducated, I can't understand nothing you said. That's like you telling a 12th grader, I'm gonna say you telling a kindergartner a 12th grader lesson. A lot of people ain't ready for that. You know what I'm saying? And then you have some Bible scholars that'll tell you, you know, you uneducated because you teaching the milk lesson. Because sometimes you got a lot of people that want to feel like that they're these show enough professors or theologians. And guess what? You left the people 2 years ago.
Yeah.
When you gonna come back and get the people?
Yeah.
When you gonna come back and meet the people where they at?
Too
The
high
thing
mind.
is, yeah, exactly. I'm just calling sin. I'm meeting the people where they at. I'm trying to get you to open up your mind and realize where you're wrong at. Because if you never think you're wrong and you think everything you doing is okay and the lifestyle you living or whatever you doing is good, guess what? How can God even reach you? It's a lot, man.
Yeah.
Like when like this thing, it's so dear to me, man. Like it'd be hard for a lot of people to even understand where I am with a lot of what goes on with my people. This my community. I consider myself like a lot of people say, yeah, he don't know nothing. I don't think he this. I don't think he that. Guess what? But one thing I do know, I'm a spiritual father in this community. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
I know that. I know God has given me the ability to lead. I know God has allowed me to be successful. I know God has blessed the work of my hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it don't take a rocket scientist to see it. And I hear all the time people say, yeah, man, I had to defend you yesterday. They say you still selling dope. Man, I ain't sold dope in 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? Like, people will do that to justify why they won't follow you.
Okay. Yeah. Why they won't heed the word that's coming from you. They discredit the messenger to ignore the message, basically. So that's a tactic, you know what I mean, of a lot of people use, man. But once again, I just want to encourage you, man. We'll stay up here all night. I think we got another show at 12. So you know, I gotta let Mr. Vernon come in here, man. But is anything else you want to leave the people, man, before we go, man? And I could just, like I said, people who study the Bible, like my father, you know what I'm saying? Like my father been passing, like, and he recite, he quote those scriptures. It's different when you can quote a scripture but it's a whole nother thing where you can go verse and chapter and quote that same scripture, man. So you done quoted about 20 of them. So that just goes to show that you're not just, fly by night. You've been studying, like you said. So, if there's any word that you want to leave the people or our audience, man, before we go.
Man, to be honest with you, my thing is keep pushing, keep praising, keep believing. I don't care what they said. I don't care what they saying. I don't care what they gonna say. You are somebody in God, man. Don't let nobody discourage you. Don't let nobody stop you. Don't let nobody block you. Don't let nobody hinder you or hold you back from becoming who God has called you to be.
That's amen. That's and I received that. I don't know if you were talking to me specifically, but that just spoke to my soul. So, I want to thank you for the words of encouragement. I want to thank you for your testimony. I want to thank you for everything that you're doing now. I don't even know the half of what you do, but I once again I've been to one event, and I can't wait for the next one or whatever that you might think I can help you with. You got my info. Reach out to me, man. If anything that you feel that I could be a part of, just let me know, man. But I thank you, Lord. Thank you. Thank God for you for sharing your wisdom, sharing your testimony, sharing your transparency, your knowledge and everything, man. Just keep being who you are, man. And once again, the same thing you just said to me, what I mean, say it to yourself as well, man. Don't stop. Don't stop speaking. Don't stop being who you are, man. Because like you said, you definitely here for a reason, and God has brought you out, man, so that you can bring others out. But I want to thank you. Thank all of our listeners, man. And like I said, I'll be in touch with you very soon, bro.
No doubt. God bless you, man.
All right. God
Peace.
bless you, man. Peace, peace, peace.